Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks, and welcome back to the show. My name is indeed Avrum Rosensweig, and I'm delighted to be here with you. And I would remind my listeners and my viewers that the idea behind this show is really to pat humankind on the back. It's to realize and recognize and to remember the beauty that we have on this planet which we share. And despite the very difficult times that we go through, I would argue now is one of those dark cloud times that we have to recall, we have to remember the great things that have happened. And I'd like to bring that to you through inspirational interviews. And we'll go to that in one moment. I would also like to add a component to my podcast, which is reminding people about the importance of helping others, of making sure that you recognize your own personal blessings and understand that not everybody has those blessings. I want to touch on for one moment the reality that in our world today, there are somewhere in the area of 150 million orphans. That is worldwide. And that number seems to double frequently. Although many recognize an orphan as simply a child with no parents, orphans can actually be quantified in two different categories, biological and social, both of which have their own meanings and implications. Biological would be where they don't have a parent or parents, and social would mean as many children in third world countries, developing nations, are sold as indentured slaves, and they themselves have to leave their family, are no longer with their parents, and therefore would be qualified very often as orphans. There are a number of different organizations that you can give to in the world in order to help children who do not have parents. Zoe Empowers is one, Love Without Boundaries is another, World Orphans, Miracle Foundations, Worldwide Orphans, and UNICEF. Because I skew towards the Jewish side of things, I will mention a couple of Israeli organizations that work with orphans, and they are Lev Lalev, the IDF Widows and Orphans Organizations, Yad Eliezer, Aleh, and Chimes of Israel. So please count your blessings. Think about how much you embraced your parents and how blessed you were to have them. And then think about those little kids in our world who do not have parents or who do not have a parent. And reach out, do a little research, because there's a lot we can do. We're very blessed to be living here in the West. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce my guest today and to tell you how excited I am to have her with us. Wendy Horowitz. How are you, Wendy?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Avrum.
It's an absolute pleasure. Wendy has recently written a book, and it's called The Milkweed and Honey Cake, a Memoir in Ritual Moments. In it, she shares stories about celebration, about loss, change, and the best way to open a pomegranate, which I love. With observations from nature, religion, and literature, Wendy explores how ritual can exalt ordinary moments and frame the extraordinary. A blue heron, an old cupboard scent, and the lingering feel of an engagement ring long gone prompt reflections laced with yearning and humor. Guiding us along a wooded path to the kitchen table in a messy garden and under a tent reverberating with song, Wendy traces the boundaries of ritual, consideration, what we do when rituals fall short, and how we might adapt each other's practices. Ladies and gentlemen, Wendy Horowitz. Once again, Wendy, thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
I was reading your book, and I have to tell you first off that you are a fine writer. You really are a good writer.
That is very kind of you to say. There isn't a muse that flies in the window and lands on your shoulder, and then you pour this all out. I work very hard at it, as all writers do, I think. And since I love words, it's hard work, but it's also a pleasure.
I started a writing club up a few months ago, and I work with some accomplished novelists. And one of the things that I've taken away from my time with them, which I'm not a novelist, is how incredibly hard these people work. One of them, Brian Prowski, literally 8 hours a day, he's sitting at his desk and not typing, but writing with a pen and paper. He arduously goes about writing his next novel. It's a lot of work, isn't it?
It is a lot of work. I am obsessive about language in the sense that I look for, in the later stages of writing, the exact words. And people think, oh, you go to a thesaurus to get, like ideas about what words to use. I go to check, like, what is that word that has the texture, the connotation? My brother, my baby brother, who's 63, said to me, oh, you use a lot of big words, Wendy. And I said, Aaron, I don't use big words. I use what I hope are the right words. So it is a lot of work. In the early stages, sometimes I wander around the house with my third cup of tea in the morning, kind of trying to figure out what I'm going to do. I have pads of paper and notebooks in every room of the house, practically, where I'm constantly jotting down ideas. Some of them take form in essays. Some of them never see the light of day. And then getting the first ideas out, I actually find to be easier. I kind of just tend to pour some of that out, or I write snippets of things. I write the middle of an essay. It's the reworking, the organization, the trying to convey the texture of life, the emotion, the events themselves. I fact check myself as closely as I can. It's my stories, but I want to make sure that I'm getting the dates right and all of that. And then, as I said, the words themselves, that's a pleasure, but it is tedious. It's bricklaying in very tiny little bricks, more like Lego laying, I would say.
Yeah, that's actually a very good analogy. Well, I was listening to an interview that you had done with somebody else, and you said, really what I want people to do is to spend time on my words, on my phrases, on my sentences. You said it's not one of those books where you spend all night just flipping a page and you read the entire book. It's not like that at all.
Yeah, it's first of all, it's not chronological. It's a memoir. So
Yeah.
these are stories from my life, but the focus, as the subtitle says, is ritual in many different forms. And you can dip in and out of it. I had a friend tell me yesterday that she's reading it out of order. I said, that's fine. You can go in and out of it, but there are definitely stories, and there's beginning, middle, and end of the stories. But I do kind of envision it as people kind of reflecting as they're reading, as kind of, I don't want to glorify it and say reading it is a ritual. I don't know if it is or not, but that it's opportunities for reflection, for relating maybe some of the events in one's own life, or ritual moments that have meant something to your listeners and viewers, and times when it falls short. I mean, all of us have failures of imagination, or frankly, our rituals sometimes aren't enough for us. And so there are mishaps, and there are times when I'm not proud of what I did, but we are all trying the best we can. So yeah, I do hope people kind of linger on it. And those who like language can enjoy it. Those who would rather just read the story, you can zip through it. I mean, I would say the chapters are very short as chapters go, so you can kind of get through an essay pretty quickly and put it down and pick it up later. So,
By the way, your backdrop is very lovely. I like you have your book set up there with some beautiful flowers.
thanks. Well, I've learned. I'm new to
Yes.
podcasting and on air, and one learns by trial and error and lots of error. So, thanks.
Yeah, no, it looks very nice. The thing about writers that I have determined is that they are tenacious folk, that they decide, as I said before, that they're going to put in copious amount of times, and that might just be for a sentence. One of my novelists in my club said that he spent the entire week writing a piece, and at the end of it, he promptly ripped it up.
Yeah, there's a lot, as I said, that doesn't see the light of day.
Yeah.
And I would add to that the editorial process. I had the amazing fortune of having a wonderful editor, Dan Chrisman, who at the time was at Indiana University Press, which is the, if readers might be confused by the fact that this is published by Red Lightning Press, that is the trade, the popular book arm of Indiana University Press. So Dan Chrisman was my editor, and talk about, just tenacity. He and I together really mulled over everything, especially the organization of the book and of the chapters, because if you don't have I was born, I turned 10, I was, that kind of chronology, then how do you order it that it makes sense so that
Yeah.
if you do want to read them in order, that there is a narrative arc and there is a sort of thematic thread through it that holds it together. And we mulled over that organization. I have to credit him for that. I mean, the words are mine, and the writing and the micro editing, if you will, is mine, but the organization, I have to credit his suggestion. And the tenacity also, if I can backtrack, um, I, I admire my fellow writers for also trying to get stuff published. It is not a pretty picture. It's a very tough business, especially now, and you have to do your research. I don't do spreadsheets, but I did a spreadsheet for
Mhm.
possible publishers. It's like, okay, they publish books that are kind of in the ballpark. This is similar, this is different. They require an agent, they don't require an agent, they're this and that, like I had this big long list and I made my way through it. So even that nitty-gritty business part of it, you have to have a lot of Sitzfleisch, if I can, and also a thick skin, because you are ignored, or there is a thank you very kindly, but no thank you. And so there's a different kind of tenacity at each stage. We're also kind of obsessive. I think it's like, oh, I run upstairs sometimes from breakfast, like, wait a minute, I know exactly what I want to do for the opening paragraph. I just figured it out. And you just
Yes. Right.
run
Right.
up there, get my exercise running up the stairs to get that going.
Yeah, so I have friends who are writers, once again novelists, and they will tell me that literally ideas come to them in dreams, and they'll open their eyes, and there, right next to them on a table is a pen and paper, and they'll jot down ideas ad nauseum sometimes, right?
Yeah. Well, many people have a witching hour, I think, where they wake up in the night. Mine is like 3 a.m. and it's not so much the dreams as much as waking up at 3 a.m. It's like, oh, that's a really good idea. I'm like jotting it down, not
Right.
even putting my glasses on, just like jotting it down on the paper, and not electronic. I mean, you can't pay me to look at electronics in the middle of the night, but jotting that down, it's really important. And sometimes you look at it in the light of day, it's like, oh, what was I thinking? But it's
Right.
all part of it. Um, Somebody asked me, because there's my book is largely takes place in the second half of my life so far, but there are things from quite a while ago, and people said, oh, did you keep a journal? Like, how do you remember all this stuff? And some of it was jotting stuff down at the time. So there's a chapter about sitting Shiva in memorial for my father, and that week I was writing just to kind of deal with things emotionally. That no one will ever see that. I don't even know where that is, but it gave rise to an essay that I then worked on and worked on and worked on, which became part of the book. And so there is this constant process of writing that you said your colleague or friend, it's not necessarily writing whole paragraphs, but it's sometimes thinking about things. It's okay, I'll confess this. I eavesdrop, not like on, listening devices, but coffee shop, people are talking loudly enough for me to hear it. I'm like, whoa, that's a really cool conversation. I sort of half listen, and then I jot it down. I never use that, but it's sort of this practice of what's the difference between dialogue and reporting a conversation and making up conversations. It's all this constant practice that my writing students ask me, well, what do I do to become a better writer? And I have the first rule of writing is, okay, you can see my chair behind me back here.
Mhm.
Sit in the chair every day, or 6 days a week if you
Yes.
observe the Sabbath. 6 days a week, sit in that chair. A sentence, a paragraph, on paper, on your computer, get to that chair and sit and write something. That's rule number one.
Honor that time, in other words.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And then it's much easier to pick up the thread when you are getting into the rhythm of that. It is a job, as I said bricklaying or Lego laying. It is a job. I mean, it's working. But I used to hesitate to use the term practice in this context, but it really is a practice. And you have to keep doing it. In a sense, it is kind of like ritual. You do it even when you don't feel like it. And I'm quoting myself now. And then perhaps there's a glimmer of something once in a while.
Wendy, I'm often curious about why it is that somebody ends up as a writer. I just want to give a little bit of a background on who you are. You were born in Connecticut, excuse me, educated in public school, then Harvard and Temple University. You said you've had a mixed metaphor of a career, that you've been like a happy fish out of water. I like the way you said that. A doctoral student in psychology with an undergrad and history degree, a psychologist in pediatric medicine, a clinician amongst academic scholars, a social scientist working with English professors, engineers, and philosophers, a writer teaching medical students. And you said, yes, indeed, I promised a mixed metaphor. Are you one of these people who can't keep a job?
They're kicking me out all the time. No, I used to feel like there was something wrong with my career trajectory because I thought, I'm supposed to stick with, but in retrospect, and at a certain point of, little, once in a while, you get some wisdom in life, I suppose. I realized, no, it actually all makes sense. There are these through lines. I did have jobs for periods of time, decades, and
Good for you. Good for you.
Shifting lanes now makes perfect sense to me with these central themes. So some of your viewers and listeners may know the field of health psychology, which is the use, not health psychology, I'm sorry, health humanities. Health humanities is the field that uses the humanities, the arts, literature, philosophy, even history, in the teaching of and training of the health professions, and also in medicine and healthcare itself. And I discovered that field very late in my career and realized, I wish that had been in existence when I was younger, because it pulls together my interest in psychology, the humanities, taking care of people, and writing, that I look back at my career and it does make sense. I mean, yes, I was the fish or the amphibian jumping from place to place, but there was this through line of the humanities coupled with the social sciences and constantly with the writing. And I think we have to, I'm not telling others how to do this, but I think we do have to say, well, what is the thing that you really passionately want to be doing, and pursue that, and it will lead to the next thing. If you are privileged in a certain way, which I certainly am with my education and opportunities that I've had. But I've also gone after it. I mean, people said, you have a PhD in psychology, you want to teach writing? And then someone finally gave me a chance, and it was like, oh, this is great. I love doing this. And that's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like, you have to pursue this as you will. And the through line for me was the humanities, was the writing, all through all these different job trajectories. So now I would add the part of the mixed metaphor that that is the end of what you were reading, is that I see my career now as more of a patchwork quilt, that it's not like this corporate line, like you're going up the ladder. It's more these pieces that I put together, and now I see the pattern. And that to me is the stronger metaphor for putting together a life, I guess.
And I guess it goes without saying that you would be a bibliophile, perhaps someone who reads copious amounts. Is
Oh
that
yeah.
correct? Yeah, you'd have to,
Yeah,
right? Yes.
you know those columns in the paper or the book review where they say what's on the author's bedside table or whatever. So, okay, I'm looking into my living room. I'm in my dining room here. Okay, so on my chair in the living room, there are 6 books over there. I'm not reading them all at once.
The
On the
problem.
coffee table, there are a couple. Up in my bedroom, there are a couple that I read regularly over time, a book of poetry and a book of philosophy that I come back to again and again. And then there were a couple quick mystery reads that Ellie Griffiths is my current favorite mystery writer, and then some more serious, kind of literary fiction. Yeah, so I love fiction. I read fiction constantly. I also read memoir, but when I was writing the memoir, I wasn't reading memoirs because it kind of muddled my brain. And as I said, I have these couple books of poetry that I'll pick up and reread again and again and again. So yes, I am reading. I just finished. I just blanked on the author's name, but the book James, which is a play on Huckleberry Finn, and James refers to the enslaved person Jim. It's a gorgeous book. And as I said, I'm blanking on the author right now, but so that was like the last book that I really lingered over, fiction that I just absolutely adored. And I also, my vice is that I buy hardback books when they come out if I want it. I try to wait for the paperback. I also use my public library. I love libraries, but I love to buy books. That is one of the few things I spend money on. So
I'll give you a piece of advice.
I'm waiting.
Yes, my father was a bibliophile, so wherever we lived, the space was really predicated on where we could put his bookshelves. He had probably over 10,000 books. Some of them was Farim, Jewish books, the big Talmuds, right?
Those are heavy.
Volumes. And some, the heavy ones, some of them psychology and philosophy and other such things. When my father passed away at a very young age, he was 61 years old, he left us his book. So I had 4 sisters. And so we each got 2,500 or 3,000 or so. It was onerous to figure out what to do with them throughout all of these years. And in the last 2 or 3 years, what I did was I actually took the vast majority of them and I donated them to a local synagogue. So my advice to you is be careful how much you get, because your kids won't necessarily
let me interject, because I am well aware of that, because I cleaned out my parents' house some years ago, and they were collectors of books. They were also children of the Great Depression and children of immigrants, so you kept something because you might need it, right? That was the mentality. I actually am a giver awayer. I am very spare in what I keep. I used to keep books like it was sort of a reflection of my identity or that period of my career. And it was actually the first year of the pandemic when we were all in isolation. And I looked at my bookshelves, floor to ceiling, 3rd floor, most rooms, and I said, that's it. I'm done. And ruthlessly, I went through, I got rid of 2 shelves, those big IKEA shelves, and then I sold the bookshelves so I couldn't refill them. And now my rule is a strict law, Avrum. 1 in, 2 out.
Yes.
1 in, 2
1 in, 2 out. That's a good one.
I bought James in hardcover, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I went up to my bookcase and I said, okay, all right, this one is kind of like crumbly yellow old paper, acid free. So we have these little free libraries around. I don't know if your listeners are familiar, but I love little free libraries. So the crumbly ones, sorry folks, go in there because libraries and used bookstores won't take them. The ones that are in good shape, so my book club will read something and I don't love it, and so I go right away to the Free Library of Philadelphia, the city library system where I live in Philly, has a wonderful bookstore, used bookstore, and they only take things that are in good shape. So I give them this bestseller, and they sell it and make money for the library. So I have to say, I used to be one that collecting. I have a worse problem, and I will say this in public here. My dear son,
Okay.
who's 27, lives in Brooklyn. His childhood bedroom is full of books, 3 deep, floor to ceiling. And when I say to him, "Can you clean out some of that, Noah?" He brings me like 3 books. I'm like, "No, this is God." So it's not my thing anymore. It's like the kids are, I'm going to blame them for the amount of books in the house.
Have you ever, Wendy, have you ever followed the journey of a book that you've given away or something has come back to you? You've seen your signature on the front inside?
No, it's in modern life, it's much more short term. So I follow that. It's called Hilltop Books in Philly. I want to give them a shout out. The bookstore that benefits the library. And every week they post their new arrivals on Instagram. And now, since I'm a 21st century woman kicking and screaming into Instagram, etc., I see, oh, I gave them that book. There it is. I see it. So it's not coming back
Yeah.
physically like my book, lots of little tabs, but it's out there in the virtual world, and I'm like, oh, good, someone's going to buy that. Hooray! So
Yeah, I often think of, this is just my crazy imagination, the road that a book that I have given away has gone on, and where it's arrived at. I think there is something inherent to our very existence whereby books are meant to be given away. I agree with you on that. Share them. They're beautiful. I love my shelves. I
right.
love them. But if someone comes in, they go, "It's a great book. I've never read it. I've always want to read it." By all means, just take it. It's
My
yours. Right?
niece's fiance was here for the first time a few months ago, and he looked at my bookshelves and he got all starry-eyed. I said, "Sam, what do you want?"
That's
I mean,
nice. No,
some
that's
of my
nice.
books I
Good for
keep
you.
for work because I do teach writing, so I'm not giving those away. And novels that I love, 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 and poetry, it is rare for me to give away a book of poetry. So
Yes.
certain things, and I have a certain amount of Judaica and history that I actually refer to. So but it's shrinking, and I think that's healthy. I mean, I know people who don't buy books, and that's fine. Go to the library, ask your library to get it, whatever. But I do think a book has a life, and giving it to someone and passing it on is really fun. And then
It is fun. It is fun. It's like Christmas every day of the
absolutely.
year. Is there do you have and I don't mean to sound elitist, although I'm going to for a moment. Do you believe there's a fundamental difference between those who read and those who don't?
Um, It's interesting. I've thought about this. I mean, I'm going to put on my psychologist hat just for a minute. I still have my license, but don't ask me for advice, please. Um, I think sometimes that the reason people don't read is because there either is a problem with reading that was not detected. I think I hear this from people. Sometimes they'll say, "Oh, I just have trouble focusing on it." And I think, okay. I think there are literacy challenges that also go undetected. I hesitating to say the following, but I will. This isn't being a psychologist anymore. This is just an observer of humanity these days. I feel like there's
Okay,
an
go ahead, sorry.
attention span problem. Like if I mentioned, social media, which makes me insane in some ways, but of course I have to use it now. And you're just zipping through, like scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. But to sit down and read a book, whether you're reading it electronically or whether you're listening, I think that's a nice way to read a book too, requires that you put actually the phone away, that you stop scrolling, that you not be all over the place, and that you immerse yourself, say it's fiction, in a world, or say it's nonfiction, like, my memoir, like that, immerse yourself in someone else's world. That requires letting go of that frenetic, frantic world that is so compelling and analogously addictive. I'm not sure it's truly addictive, but it is somewhat, and I'm finding myself as I've had to be on social media a little more jittery, like checking likes and blah, and I'm like, get out of here. So So I
Mhm.
feel that, yes, there are readers and non-readers, and there's a difference, but I am someone who looks at the context for that happening. When I meet someone who says, "Well, I don't really read," I'll say, "Well, what do you do with your downtime?" And hearing, some people watch TV or they're online or whatever, or maybe they exercise or whatever, but, um, I don't think it's elitist to note that there are differences. I'm just not sure. I think there are also results of reading and not reading. I mean, I am an educator, so I think reading, whatever it is you want to read, broadly, read stuff that you wouldn't think you would like, open your mind. But I do think it makes you a better thinker and hopefully critical thinking. Um, Fiction particularly, but memoir, I think, as well, gives us a certain amount of empathy. We identify with a character who's not like us, and maybe it helps bridge something. That's my idealized view of it. So I'm not sure I would sort of blame someone for it, but I think there are both reasons people don't read and obviously effects of reading and not reading.
Yes, and if people are looking for ways and means of figuring out how best for them to read or start reading, one room you did not mention in terms of where you keep all your books is the
Mm.
bathroom. And that's a really great place to read because there's nothing else you can do. So consider putting probably, I don't know why I say this, but a soft cover book in the bathroom, and before a few months you'll be
Well,
finished.
I'll tell you something about the house I grew up in. There were books or magazines in every room in the house. So I come by this honestly, as my grandmother used to say.
Yes,
And
me too.
in
Yes.
the bathrooms were magazines. Usually, people would, and then people would like come out of the bathroom like, "Yes, can I borrow this magazine?" Yes,
Right. Oh, look.
that was something that I had grown up with. But I think there's also I speak to younger people sometimes who kind of, when they hear like I was a professor and all this stuff, like, well, they kind of almost sheepishly sometimes say, well, they like graphic novels, the comic book. And I say, that's reading. I mean, it's not a genre that I generally enjoy, but some of them are beautiful. I have friends who are illustrators and I buy their books. I love what they're doing with that genre. So it's like whatever genre it is, there's nothing you shouldn't read. I am a strong proponent of First Amendment, of being able to speak out and speak our minds, and also to be able to read what you want to. So there's no bad place to start from my point of view.
Yeah, I don't know if I would read Mein Kampf. I
Well, I
thought about it.
think we make the something like that, I think, would be read in a segment in a history class as,
Yes.
okay, we are
Yes.
understanding this as a document from history, not like, oh, I'm going to pick up, the latest mystery story and read. But it's kind of like films. I remember having this debate with my 20-something kids about, there's certain filmmakers that, and other artists, like, would you go to this film? Would you do this? And there are ethical and moral and philosophical ways, I think, to think about literature and the arts. I feel like, for example, with music, there are people like, well, I won't listen to this music, I won't listen to that, and that's your choice. I have certain ways that I've framed that, which has changed over time. So part of it is, say there's a filmmaker or writer who was really kind of despicable in their life in some way. If they are deceased and not benefiting from it, and especially if the copyright is, then, and I want to read that, I would. I think we have to make these decisions, along the way, what
Yes.
the
Yes.
parameters are. And yes, there are books that I would be very uncomfortable having in my house, and that's just my own take on that. So, yeah.
I was really mesmerized when I first spoke to your publisher about you and what you had written. And suffice it to say, the book is on rituals. And why that really grabbed me was because I'm very ritualistic.
Mhm.
I come from a rabbinical home. My father was a rabbi, my mother was a rebbitzin. I've mentioned this many times. and you yourself have said in interviews and in your book, that when you are brought up in a Jewish household, regardless of the denominations, you're surrounded by, you are ensconced in ritual. There, it really is no way around it. And that comes during the holidays, that comes every Saturday on Shabbat. And there are endless amounts of rituals that Judaism prescribes, some of which people will accept all of them, and others who say, no, you know what, I'll take a few. I'll light the Friday night candles. I'd like to give a definition for rituals and tell me if this is in sync with how you define rituals. A ritual is a set of actions or behaviors that are performed in a specific, often prescribed order and are typically symbolic in nature. Rituals are usually done for religious, spiritual, cultural, or social reasons. They can be individual or communal activities that carry deep significance and meaning for those involved. Rituals can vary greatly depending on the culture or the tradition, but often involve repetition, special objects, chants, prayers, or gestures. Examples of rituals include religious ceremonies like weddings, funerals, religious services, as well as daily routines like morning coffee or certain personal habits that hold symbolic importance. Finally, rituals help structure life, mark significant events, and provide a sense of connection, tradition, or belonging. Does that make sense to you?
I will take exception with only one part of it. So, and I might, if I
Yeah.
may add to it as well, because I have
Mhm,
expanded my idea
mhm.
of ritual. So I make a distinction in the book, and this is debatable, it's just my take on it, between salutary habits. So exercise, your morning coffee, those are habits to me, and ritual may also be a habit. It certainly is a habit, but I'm not sure that it has the resonance of the other kinds of rituals that you alluded to and defined. So I demarcate what I'm calling ritual from those salutary habits, because people say, oh, I have the ritual of, taking a walk every morning. And a walk may become a ritual. In fact, I describe in the book several walks that turned into a ritual for me. But it had what you describe. It either had rootedness to it, or tradition to it, or I drew from that history and tradition to render it meaningful. So I would demarcate, I would exclude from my little Venn diagram here of ritual, things that
Yes.
are salutary habits. Otherwise, everything could be a ritual. Making my breakfast could be a ritual. Now, it's interesting, in Judaism, and I think there are other religious traditions like this, you do make your way through the day, if you're fully observant in the classical sense of the word, with almost constant ritual. I mean, you say a prayer before you take a sip of water. For your listeners and viewers that don't know that, I mean, there's almost there's continual ritual throughout the day. But so that's a particular way of thinking about it, but those are prayers, let's say, and there are particular ways of doing things. I want to expand, though, your definition a little bit to the things, and here we can debate this, and readers and viewers and listeners can debate it, where we stumble upon something. I talk about this in several of my stories in the book, where we suddenly realize, oh my goodness, this has become a ritual. So the story that I think is emblematic of this is my story about crossing what then was called the Tappan Zee Bridge between um, across the Hudson River, and on my way up to Connecticut and to see my folks. And it became a ritual because I noticed at particular nodes, turning points in time, just after 9/11, I looked south and the New York City skyline was different, and I suddenly felt like I was on a pilgrimage. And then at my dad's funeral, I noticed that crossing the bridge, and in Jewish tradition, bridges have a particular resonance, and it suddenly occurred to me, and there are two bridges in the book, one a walking bridge and one that driving bridge, that,
Yes.
oh, there is meaning to this. This has become a ritual for me. And it's not like, oh, I go across it's now called the Cuomo Bridge, when I need to do the ritual of the bridge. It's like if I happen to be driving, I keep my eyes on the road, but there's a resonance to it. So that's neither from tradition, nor is it traditional, nor is it particularly, quote, religious or spiritual, as you use the word, but it became something with a profound depth. And there were other things like that. I would also say that yes, I did grow up in a Jewish household. We went to a conservative shul. My parents were not, again, in the traditional sense, particularly religious or observant, but every single Friday night, my mother lit candles. We had challah, we had wine. One of the dedications in my book is to her, keeper of the Friday night flame. And if you would have asked her why she did this, the words that would come up were tradition, identity, belonging, legacy, le dor vador, from generation to generation. And I would say, quite frankly, and I say this is no secret, it's in the book, that she actually was a little bit uncomfortable with talking about religion, which is kind of funny since we had all the holidays. We were brought to synagogue on particularly high holidays. We were all educated Jewishly in that synagogue, and but it was very important to my parents. They felt that this was a gift to us, and I took that in and then gave that gift, I hope it was a gift, to my children as well. I think that we can pick and choose, at least that's my philosophy of it. I think that tradition has resonance and longevity if we are permitted to maybe slightly alter something, take what's there. And I also respect people who keep it as it was. But for me, it's stayed alive and vital and meaningful by making it my own, by picking and choosing, by adding ritual. I had friends over Friday night for Shabbat dinner this past weekend, and I said to them, "Oh, I'm trying to add the hand washing to my ritual, and I think I have it down." And they were so sweet; they were kind of coaching me. So I've actually added traditional stuff to my practices, but also these stumbling upon the bridge kind of thing. That's part of my exploration of what we mean by a
Right.
ritual life.
Right. So I want to dig even deeper when it comes to ritual being ritualistic, because it's a fascination of mine and it's something that we don't talk about normally. There are a number of different reasons why people involve themselves in rituals, as you mentioned. One is a connection with the divine. Another is purification and sanctification, marking life's transitions, reinforcing community and belonging, and remembrance and continuity of tradition. Now, one of the examples that you gave of ritual in your book, it was really quite beautiful, actually. You had come home after a few weeks of being away, and you found a bouquet of flowers on your doorstep. And obviously, after a number of weeks, they had started to rotten. And you said, I'll throw them out. And then you took a step back and said, no, I'm going to use these for something special. And you would take a clump of that bouquet every day, walk down to a flowing body of water, and throw it in the water. It's almost like the Jewish tradition of tashlich, where you're getting rid of your sins. Explain to us further why that became a ritual to you. Why did you decide to do that? What did Wendy Horowitz get out of that action?
Right. So I should note that one of the features of the definition when you first gave it so beautifully and thoroughly of ritual is the repetition. This was a one-shot deal, or rather a week. I kind of combined
Yes.
tashlich with like Shiva in a way, because it was kind of marking the end of a relationship. So why did I decide to do that? I looked at the bouquet. I was this is one of those, not one of my better moments kind of thing. I was like sort of annoyed. Like, why'd you send this? Like, we don't have a relationship anymore. And it was a romantic interest. Okay. So
I
yeah.
got
So,
that. Yeah.
okay. So it was like, what am I going to do with this? I could just throw it. It's like, nah, we're coming up on the month in which we reflect. We're heading towards the high holidays when we do actual tashlich with bread or whatever you use in a flowing pot. I thought, whoa, I could just do this. So the first day I kind of felt a little silly. I went with my little plastic bag, like I had a couple stems and flowers and, And I kind of went down there and I stood on the bridge and I watched it float away. And it was psychologically and emotionally renewing because it felt like, oh, just let go of that, just reflect on that. And I eventually, so I did that 7 days in a row, and or 6 days, I forget. And I would discover things like I was walking into our urban beautiful park, Wissahickon Park near me, the part of Fairmount Park in Philadelphia, and I noticed like a spider web glinting in the morning with its dew on it, and I noticed birds. I realized that there was a benefit to taking that time to reflect. So it was both a way to kind of ritualize the end of that relationship, which it was long gone, but needed to really be defined, and also bridge it to the Jewish practices. And that's not a practice that exists in Judaism, like throwing bouquets in the water to end a relationship. But what is the practice for a relationship that's long gone, that's still lingering in some weird way? And that became very important to me. And there were rewards. I mean, no spoilers here, but there were rewards of seeing natural phenomena. And eventually it had a additional resonance, which was again the bridge. This bridge in Judaism is really important. The Tzam Ma'od, the narrow bridge, but the also realizing that flowing water comes from a source. And when I thought that, I thought, oh, I'm looking up towards the literal source of the river, and source, if you capitalize that word, also is reference to the divine, and not something I talk as much about in the book. I don't feel like my theology is well versed enough to really talk about that in a thorough way, but my layperson's knowledge is enough to make that kind of reference. So it became resonant and deeper. It wasn't just a psychological matter anymore. It was a psychological matter, right? An emotional cleansing in a way, but it also took on that traditional resonance in a couple of respects.
A few years ago, I was in Florida, and a friend of mine, Rachel, her mother passed away, Rebecca. And I wanted to make sure that I did something to remember her by, because I loved her dearly and she loved me. And that's always nice. So I sat on the beach in Miami and I drew a circle around me with the sand. And I shut my eyes and I meditated and I made a prayer. And sure enough, after a few minutes, who should join me but a bird, right? And of course, we know all the symbolism that authors talk about behind having a bird in your life, in particular after someone passes away. Many stories about how a bird would arrive at someone's windowsill, after somebody had died, and stay there for 30 days and sort of watch over them and then finally leave. So this bird stayed, and my ritual finished when the wind had really destroyed the circle. It no longer existed. It had blown it away, and the bird had flown away. So would you say, is that a one-off ritual? In my sense, looking back on why I did it, was to take a breath, was to stop, was to recognize who was in my life and who I had lost. It really was a moment of consideration. Is that ritualistic in nature?
I do think it is, even if it's one time, because of the layers that you describe. It was to mark the passing of someone with whom you had this mutual love, who was special to you. There was nothing that existed in a sense for you. You're not going to say cottage for this person or something, the prayer after close relatives die. And it had these layers. Meditation, you said a prayer. It had a symbolism to it. It was also at a big body of water, at the ocean. So it's like,
The ocean.
it's to me, it has so much resonance. As a literary minded person, I mean, to me, symbolism, religion, literature, there's a lot of overlap. And so I see that definitely as a ritual that has, because of this meaning making, I think it's marking the time, it's marking the loss. and it's also rendering meaning from it. And some of that's wordless. We could define it or not. It's maybe beyond words in a way. And the fortunate occurrence of the bird landing, I mean, there's a bird in my book too, as you may recall, a word or two, adds to it. It adds to it. And we imbue that with meaning. I think there's intrinsic meaning in these things, but we also imbue it with meaning. That's what humans do. And I love that. So yeah, I would, it's a ritual. But here's the thing about, we talked a bit earlier, but we referred to the idea of like borrowing ritual or, with the boundaries. I wouldn't tell someone, oh, you lost somebody close to you. Go do, Avrum did this thing. You should go do this. I feel like that was something that you came up with. It was very idiosyncratic, individual, meaningful. I'm not going to tell someone when they break up with somebody or someone breaks up with you, go throw flowers in the stream. Like that was my thing. If someone's inspired by that, great, or thinks it's not of interest, but it's a different kind of ritual because it's individual to you. But that still is ritual to me, very much so.
Yes, and you actually speak about borrowing from other people's rituals or not feeling responsible to take on another person's ritual. And I think that's appropriate. I think there's communal rituals, there's individual rituals, national and probably even worldly rituals. And some are very, very personal to yourself. One of the pieces that I really, really love that you wrote about, and for some reason I identified with it strongly, and I'm wondering if many readers do, both male and females, you wrote about your china cabinet.
Yeah.
And the reason why it resonates with me, as I mentioned before, my mother, God bless her soul, had a very, very beautiful china cabinet. And she invested a lot in it over many, many years. Silver pieces, if I'm not mistaken, some gold-plated pieces, a wonderful wine set that she had received from a cousin who was a famous ballet dancer. She promised them to me one day when I get engaged. And my sisters, 4 sisters, I've lost one since during COVID, but they also have exquisite china cabinets. And you wrote about the cleaning of those pieces, right? And looking at them and holding them and remembering where they came from. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so that's from actually the first chapter of the book called Polishing the Silver, which when some people hear that, they want to, as I say, go take a nap, like, polishing silver. Was that ritual?
Right.
And I came to this by the fact that I realized there are these pieces. There's a couple pieces of my maternal grandmother's silver. I have a hodgepodge of china. So I came to this over time when I realized that what I was engaging in actually has a very, very old root to it, which is hidu mitzvah, which is rendering, I think it's translated as making the mitzvah, the practice or the good deed more beautiful, and that beauty adds meaning. So there's memory. So I take out my former mother-in-law's little piece of china that she gave me, and I remember her and I think about her and I share that at the table. It makes it more beautiful. It evokes the past. And it also, to me, the practice itself. So, I'm not sitting here polishing silver every day, folks. Believe me, I am not doing that. I have other things I need to do. But before a holiday or, before Thanksgiving or whatever, if I'm taking out a piece, I spend time on it. And I get in a little meditative state. I don't mind doing it. It's physical. You're doing that. Your hands get all tarnished. And, I do that and I put it out. I take out the little crystal. And again, like the bookshelves, I've pared down. Believe me, I don't have tons of stuff anymore. But what I do have, I'm looking straight at my china cabinet behind my screen here, is very meaningful from way in the past or from travels that I've made. So there's memory, there's making the thing more beautiful, and also there is community. So sharing that with others really, really matters to me. And it's sensory. We haven't talked about this much, but the best rituals are multi-sensory, and some of them are very physical. So each china cabinet I would maintain has a particular scent from the years. Hopefully, it's a nice scent.
Mhm,
There's
mhm.
also a sound even that the cabinet makes when you open and close it. There's a physicality to holding that thing in your hand, and that is a very human thing. It's kind of like something we haven't talked about yet, Avram, which is food. Food is central to the human condition and to ritual. There's a reason this is called, I'm just going to do this, milkweed and honey cake. Food is really
Yes.
important in ritual, but the other senses are important too. So,
You wrote about a very interesting phrase, which I believe is yours, the yellow school
yeah.
bus moment. What is that?
Yellow school bus moment um, was the times when I realized when my kids were small that it was a moment of letting go, but also of awe and of amazement, that sort of feeling this click of time. So the specific story where that title of that chapter comes from is watching my son at age 6 get on the yellow school bus for the first time, and a neighbor comforted me and saying it's going to get easier, but it wasn't like just dropping them at daycare and kind of getting used to the fact that they're on their own. It was watching him step into the future by himself. And I think that there are these moments with children in our lives, whether there are children or grandchildren or other special children in our lives, where you're watching something happen that in a sense it's their ritual and they don't even know it. We are witnesses at that point to a moment of momentousness. And I saw that step onto the bus and then other times like this that became very important to me. And I started writing about it and keeping track of these. And it still happens once in a blue moon with the 20 somethings, but it was very much of the time of watching them leave and forge their own path that to me had another layer or facet to it. It was not a practical matter. It wasn't just the psychological, well, healthy attachment and distance and separation, all those psychological things. It seemed quite profound to me at the time. Um,
And then later on, you wrote about your son who was 6 hours away in school, writing you and asking you about how to make a brisket,
So he
right?
was, yes. So he didn't write. He actually called me. So we video chatted. He was like holding up the meat, like, what's this pointy end of it?
Yeah.
And that, there was a food moment, and oh, I love that. It's like he's trying to make my mother's brisket, and that still sort of reaching back. And so where does that fit in with ritual? Well, that brisket we made at Rosh Hashanah every year, like that was the thing. And here he was making that. And that becomes then, it's like the beautifying the table. It's using those old recipes, using those practices that bolster the more formal ritual and become part of the family lore and become part of what we do to remind ourselves of our humanity, our identity, our community. And you started off this segment today talking about being concerned about others outside your circle. And I see that as also these are stepping stones to that empathy, that concern, that this is how we keep our humanity, one of the ways that we keep our humanity.
Very
So,
good. So let's talk about food for a few minutes. I distinctly remember a number of things when it comes to my mother's cooking or my mother's baking. One of which, and this is local to your book, is her honey
okay.
cake. And the big question today is, now that my mother's gone, amongst my sisters, is whose honey cake is as good as
Whoa.
mom's? Whose honey cake tastes like mom's, right? I remember Passover time, there are these two foods that are part of the Passover plate. There's moro, there's charoset, and there was a whole ritual in terms of creating those two. And it was arduous and it took time. And people were very serious about how much wine you put in. And what about the chopped walnuts? There was a whole tradition behind what Booby had put in, what Booby's Booby had put in. Again, to be Jewish is to be hungry. They say we were persecuted, then we sat down and we ate. and it's to prepare. And preparation is enormous within a Jewish household. So tell us about the rituals of cooking, of
Yeah,
baking.
so I would like to expand that because I do want listeners and viewers to know this book has a lot of Jewish content, but it is meant for a much wider audience. And I do acknowledge that there are many, many traditions, many, many religious and other rituals that food is central to. I'm sure your listeners and viewers can think of diverse traditions where food is central. But the preparation that you talk about and the chopping of the apples for the haroset and stuff, that effort is important. Ritual is kind of a pain sometimes, and that's okay. The drawing from the past, making it your own, you said there's a debate among your siblings, like whose is like mom, good as
Yeah,
mom's.
whose
But
is the
here's
best?
my
Yes.
version of that is recreating. So I actually have a chapter in the book called Sacred Pages. It's about my recipe file, trying to recreate my grandmother's cookies over several times and not being able to, because they would say a pinch of this, a yard side cup of that, or like, what was she doing? What did she mean by smushing it up? Like, what did that mean? I don't know. It's like, it's Talmudic. It's like interpretation, it's like, what do we do with that? So the attempt to recreate that to me can be a sacred moment. You're invoking, particularly these were our foremothers. I mean, the women did most of the cooking. So I'm honoring them by doing this. I mean, men cook too, but these are my ancestors, and evoking that cookie, that brisket, that, trying to get that just right is a practice. And if it's particularly for a special occasion or a holiday, then it becomes part of, I think, the ritual itself, the preparation of it. Um, I'm not a real baker, even though I have a whole chapter devoted to baking. I'll talk about other people's baking. And baking, particularly, say, leavened bread, particularly, is quite ritualistic. You have to wait for it to rise. You have to put it down again. You have to do all this stuff. And it has, to me, again, these layers of meaning. My own version of this is the mostly preparations for the holidays. There's the honey cake, but I tend to make my mother's plum cake, which for the Jewish New Year, for Rosh Hashanah, and it's with these plums that are available in the fall, and recreating that and getting the streusel on the top just right becomes in itself, over decades, part of the preparation that you refer to. I let others do the honey cake, in fact.
Right. And I'm assuming that you're so meticulous about it because in some ways, in the crevices of your imagination, you don't want to break that important lineage, right?
Right. As I said earlier in our discussion, I think innovation is good, and altering things to have continuity. But yeah, I've had this debate with my first cousin who lives in Seattle, like my other grandmother's cookies that we've been trying to recreate for decades. Like, nobody's gotten it quite right. We're trying to preserve that. And those women in particular didn't leave us a lot. Those women, although later they worked outside the home, they mostly raised the kids, and particularly their mothers, they cooked. And so what do we have to pass on? Their recipes. Maybe there's a silver spoon, but the silver spoon's going to get lost eventually. But the cooking, I would love for those recipes to continue somehow.
And Wendy, I don't think you mentioned this, but I'm wondering if this is a factor in all of this. I'll often say, it's really very tasty what you just made. When I'm sick, she'll send me over chicken soup. And she'll say to me, "Did you taste the love?" And she was very serious about it. And I'm thinking that when you cook or when you bake your mother's or your grandmother's recipe, uh, is there a sense there? Yeah, she's loving me right now.
Well, I'm not particularly a believer in the afterlife, but I feel like I'm evoking that sense of her at my elbow. So it's kind of like and it's analogous to something else I talk about in the book about writing to my deceased father. He's not going to get those letters. I don't mail them. It's evoking the memory. It's having the presence, the memory, the strong memory. And it's not just, I mean, it's neurons firing, right? But it's also this visceral sense, this very rooted sense of the presence of their memory and of their legacy. So in that sense, yes, their love is quite present. It is the thing that, one of the things that keeps me going is that I had the great fortune of having a very loving family and ancestors and parents, and that is present. That is very, very present in my life.
Being that you don't believe in the afterlife, do you still go visit your parents' grave?
Oh, absolutely.
Why?
Absolutely. Okay, so my mom is still alive. My
Thank God.
dad's grave. Why? Okay, so this is going to be like, I'm going to skirt the question.
Okay.
The same probably answer that my mom would ask if you could have asked her, like, why did she like candles? So I am a believer in practices for the dead, funerals, Shiva, all of that, Shloshim, visiting the grave, putting the stone on the grave, is for the living.
Mhm.
And preserving the memory that the marking and saying, I was here, leaving that stone for someone else to see. I was here remembering this wonderful man. So I go for, I mean, my dad's yard site is actually next week, and I'll be traveling for the book. And I called my friends, the first people I'm seeing. I said, can we light a yard site candle when I'm there? Yes, of course. And why do I do that? I do that because it feels very meaningful to me to continue that practice that my ancestors did, which was a very wise practice. You have 7 days of intense mourning, then you have 30 days, then you have 11 months, and then a couple of times a year for the rest of your life. That is not like you're in sackcloth and ashes for the rest of your life. You mark it at particular times, and that marking of time makes the loss meaningful. It's like, okay, it means something. I think about him at the time and I honor his memory. That's why I do it.
Well, you touched on the Jewish practice, and it is indeed what's called a minhag. It's a tradition or a ritual of when one visits the cemetery,
Mhm.
their father or their mother, they'll place a rock on top of the tombstone. And I've done a little research into why that is. And I think it really comes down to know that this man or this woman is remembered, as you were saying.
Mhm.
It's an
And
important piece.
when I go to a graveyard, so my kids and I were in Paris last year for reasons I don't need to go into, but we went to this, it was my dad's yard site, and I couldn't find an open synagogue, and I was beginning to panic, and my son says,
Yeah.
calm down,
Yeah.
Mom. And so we went to this graveyard, and I thought, okay, I'll visit someone else's grave.
Oh,
So
that's nice.
we went to this graveyard, and I put a
Right.
stone on someone else's grave. I thought, okay, pass it on. It was like, and it was my son helped me do that, because I was like panicking. He said, Mom, calm down. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't get a minion psychologist. I was like, fine. He said, let's go to this grave. So I put a stone on someone else's. I thought someone will see that and know somebody was remembering this
Good.
person. And
Excellent.
that's enough. So that was a spontaneous thing, helped by my wonderful children, of course. So
No, that's very creative of you. And I in fact, I tell people the same thing is be creative. If for whatever reason you just cannot come around to saying Kaddish, you just can't. You just don't have the opportunity. Say a prayer in your mind,
yeah.
or phone someone and have them say it for you. Wendy, in conclusion, are there any very strange rituals that you came across or ones that you actually do yourself?
Okay, so not do, but did. I would say that throwing the flowers from the bridge was a bit odd. I mean, I didn't do an anthropological study of ritual for this book, so it's not like I kind of stumbled upon.
Right.
Um, But I would say that going back to the china cabinet, um, I think it's a little, I mean, it resonated with you, but I think it is a little odd to treat the, taking out stuff and cleaning it as a ritual. I mean, I think there are roots to that again, but I think that's a little strange in some ways. Um, I'm going to cheat and look at the book chapters to see if there's anything. Okay, so here's one that I kind of like. I don't know if it's strange, but it's funny. There is humor in the book as well. So we passed the holiday of Tu B'Shvat, the New Year of the Trees, some weeks ago, and my kids and I started observing it before there were, kind of the revival of that tradition. And one of the things we came up with was smashing a coconut for if your listeners don't know, you eat different fruits with different degrees of hardness or seeds and stuff. And we would like be on the floor. The kids would like take a hammer and smash a fresh coconut. And, I'd sort of watch and they would make a mess and it was funny. And then they would feed the coconut meat to our guests and we'd say a little prayer. And so that was like smashing coconuts, was one of our things that I came up with to make the holiday fun for little kids. Like, it's a little dangerous for little kids to be wielding a hammer and it's ridiculous and it makes a mess. And making a mess and something that's dangerous and funny is a good way to engage children in ritual. I have
Good one.
decided. So that's
Good
my
one.
strange
Or
one.
there's another Jewish tradition where we literally, and we did not do this, and most people I know do not. You take a live chicken.
Oh, I've
Right?
heard about it.
Yeah, at the holiday time, Rosh Hashanah, and you swing it over your head. The idea of swinging away your sins, right?
Okay, so we used to
There's a
rubber
strange one.
once. We used to rubber chicken.
That's a good one. Okay.
I wasn't going to do a live chicken.
Oh, these are very strange ones. Wendy, I've been playing around with AI for the last few months. Excuse me. And I have asked AI to write poems about my guests. So I have an ode to Wendy Horowitz
I am fearful
of the poem.
By AI. Go ahead.
So grip the sides of your chair.
Yeah.
And here we go.
Okay.
In pages ink with memories bright, Wendy Horowitz brings to light the rituals that weave through life, in joy, in sorrow, in quiet strife. From the scent of a cupboard old to the soft engagement ring long sold, each moment's story, gentle and clear, finds its place within a tear. Through loss and laughter, change and grace, she guides us through a sacred space, a garden wild, a table spread, where love and tradition are softly led. A couple wet in stormy skies, a surprise found as rain clouds rise, a graduation canceled, dreams delayed, yet pomp and circumstances still played. Her children's laughter fill the air, in guinea pig chaos, love laid bare. Birthdays, rituals, a dance, a prayer, in everyday moment, magic is there. From the heron's wings so wide, so true, to the pomegranate's crimson hue, Horwitz finds meaning where it hides, in nature's pulse, in life's divides. Rituals both old and new offer solace when life feels askew, in loss, in love, in everything she shows how small moments can take wing. And finally, the world may tremble, paths may bend, but new rituals can heal and mend. Through messy gardens, sacred song, we find the strength to carry on. In Milkweed and Honey Cake, we see how rituals form our legacy, how in the dance of joy and pain we seek and find meaning again. A memoir stitched with life's embrace, a woman's search for sacred space. Wendy Horowitz teaches us with grace to make our rituals find our place.
Very good, AI. So what fascinating, no, thank you, Avrum. That's a lovely.
You are welcome. You don't have to like it. Not everybody does.
No. I think it's really actually kind of fun, and I'm very glad that you did the right thing. Credit the author. We should always credit the author.
Yes.
I think it's really interesting. That's a whole other discussion about AI and writing. But what I gleaned from that is that AI read the book blurb quite carefully, because some of those are direct quotes. But I appreciate that. I'm taking it also as your tribute, and I appreciate the kind of the endorsement that you're doing with that. I'm being a little coy and funny about it because I'm sort of struggling with the AI thing in writing. As a writer, I do worry about AI is wonderful and it's very useful, but I do worry about the role of the writer and all this.
Oh
Another
yes,
discussion for another time.
I've
But
had some very high profile guests, and I've done the same thing, and some of them um, just dislike it immensely. Like, well, it's AI. I'm not interested in what a computer has to write about me. Literally, somebody told me that. Right?
oh, I'm fascinated. I think it's really interesting. And actually, it did capture I mean, it
Yes,
stole
it
a
did.
lot of my phrases, and it doesn't know yet to put those in quotes. But aside from that, it wasn't inaccurate in this. I mean, it's complimentary, which is nice, but it's accurate in terms of the book. So, it did its
Yes.
homework.
You're a
Anyway,
lovely person, by the way.
well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's
You
very
dealt
kind.
with that. You dealt with that very well. In conclusion, Wendy, I always like to send out a message to my listeners and to my viewers, something that they can take with them, especially those individuals who are having a hard time finding their zone in life. You know, that place which I call a gift. In Hebrew, we call it a matana. I know, and clearly you know, that when you find that thing in life that perhaps you were put on this earth to succeed at, to develop, to nurture. Happiness and meaning and purpose comes along with it. And I can see for all of the work that you put into your book, into your life, just the idea that you think about rituals and how to incorporate them into your life, into your children's life, to your friends and family and community life, that in itself holds so much meaning. So, what would you say to people who perhaps are a little bit void of ritual? How might they investigate it more so? How might they incorporate ritual into their life on a greater basis?
So it's a great question. I think we start with what exists. So if they don't feel comfortable or they don't feel part of a tradition from their past, to look at what things that they perhaps, I assume we're talking about adults now,
Yes.
that maybe there was something in their childhood that they liked and to build on that. So I think not to reinvent the wheel, but to take something from the past and to alter or build on it, or to start small, to look around. So I mentioned in passing the yahrzeit candle, lighting the memorial candle for my dad's uh, memorial next week. And so, for example, there are, again, many traditions that use candles. Um, and I think something as simple as saying, oh, is there a time when I need to mark this time? To take a breath. Maybe it's a candle. Maybe it's, you pointed out the flowers behind me. Maybe it's getting a bouquet of flowers and making my table. You can order pizza and have a holiday. You don't have to like make the brisket or the turkey or whatever it is. You can order a pizza, but maybe you put some flowers on the table to start small. And the other thing is to notice the yearning. I think sometimes people feel lost when they don't have ritual. And I'm not saying everybody needs to do what I do or what you do, Avrum, or at all. This is not a self-help or a how-to book. I really am not in that business. But to notice when something feels like it's missing, and then to ask other people in whatever community you're in, or ask your elders or ask your friends, hey, what do you guys do about this? What is your community do? What do you do individually? And getting some inspiration there. So reaching out to community, starting small, thinking about the past, and then taking it forward. How do you make it your own?
Mhm, mhm.
That's to me really important. And it doesn't require some creativity, and very, very small. That teaspoon from the aunt, using that and noticing, as I mentioned in the book, the little bite marks on it. Like, that must have
Yes,
been a
you
great
mentioned.
uncle. Um,
I
and
love it.
don't forget humor. Humor is There is an idea of being overly scrupulous. Scrupulosity is this idea that you're being too particular about your rituals and forgetting the meaning of it. Um, don't worry about it. Be funny. Like, it's fine, smashing the coconut. I mean, that's like not particularly a sacred act, but maybe it is. Maybe it became a sacred act, right? We were being ridiculous. And that's also okay.
Yeah, I just want to touch on what you were mentioning before. It's the idea of taking out an old spoon. When my grandparents were around, the way they used to drink tea is they would put a sugar cube in there between their teeth, and then they would sip the tea, right? And all of that involved a little spoon, and sometimes they would by mistake bite on the spoon. So 30, 40, 50, 60 years later, when you take out that spoon, you'll see a tooth mark on it. And you know that is a tooth mark of a man who lived, of a woman who lived, and very possibly your grandparents. And that in itself, just that mark alone, brings them back to life. So I want to thank you so much for being with me. I'm fascinated by what you've written and what you've expressed today. And my very first thought was when I bought this book and I started reading is this is an amazing gift for many people. And I bought a few actually for my sister and some friends. And I think that they're going to love it. It's an excellent, excellent book that people can read on a Shabbat afternoon, you know.
Thank you. That's a very kind thing to say. I really appreciate that you want to pass it on.
I do. You've done an excellent job. And I'm not being obsequious here. I really, really enjoyed your writing and your insights. Just excellent, Wendy. You did an outstanding job. Where can people buy your book?
So I would suggest it's quote wherever books are sold, but my website, I don't know if you can put that on, your
Not now, I can. Later
Not
I
right,
can. Yes.
later you can. WendyHorwitzAuthor.com. The first page, the homepage, it's got all the options for where to buy it. I encourage people to go into their small independent bookstores and ask for it. And if they don't have it, ask them to order it. I'm all about independent bookstores.
Yeah.
The big company that starts with an A, yes, you can get it there. I prefer the other things. There's also a wonderful company called bookshop.org. Bookshop.org. You go there, you order the book, and you indicate an independent bookstore that you want to benefit from your purchase. And so you can get it online that way. But independent bookstores, and if people can't afford it, I do encourage going to the public library and say, hey, can you get this book for the collection and take it out? So, but yeah, my website is your best kind of linchpin for seeing all the options.
Good stuff.
So,
all right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching and for listening. I would ask you to remember a couple of things, one of which we talked about at the top of the show, and that is to be aware of the fact that there are up to 150 million orphans in our world today. And that many of us, thank God, are blessed to have the resources to not only take care of ourselves and our children, our grandchildren, our families, our community, but we have the opportunity to give charity, what we call in Hebrew tzedakah. So please go out of your way and do a little research into what it means that there are that many orphans in the world. And you might be surprised that they're not just in developing nations, but you will find them in our nations as well. And I suggest very, very strongly that you consider, in terms of your whole Excel sheet, as we talked about before for charity, include that in it, because really orphans, people who do not, little kids who do not have parents, are generally the most vulnerable amongst us. I want to thank Wendy Horowitz for being with us. I thought you were spectacular. I love your book, and I recommend it to everybody, and not only for yourself, but as a gift. And until we meet again, as we say in Yiddish, sei gesinnt. When do you speak Yiddish at all?
Ein bisschen.
A bisschen.
I'm sure the German is coming in my head. I also speak German. A bisschen.
All right. Hopefully your German's a bit better. Until we meet again, thank you so much for joining us. Sei gesinnt, and we will be with you again soon.